Yo, YouTube, what's up with your boy? Sports and Fitness Rants. I'm back, guys. Click that like button. Subscribe to my channel. What's up, y'all? Welcome back, guys. Welcome back, man. Got another great video for you guys today, as usual, man. You guys know the deal on this channel. So about setting the record straight, stopping the lies, stopping the narratives, stopping them from rewriting history, guys, holding the standard. And in line with holding the standard, I want to do a video and shout out to my man, Lenny Wilkens, the great Lenny Wilkens. The player, the coach, Lenny Wilkens. A lot of people don't remember Lenny Wilkens was an actual player in the NBA. A lot of us that grew up in the 80s and the 90s, we remember Lenny Wilkens as a coach. I remember Lenny Wilkens as the coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? I believe he coached the Atlanta Hawks some years. Lenny Wilkens, a great coach, man. Inducted into the Hall of Fame as a player and a coach. I believe there's only two players or two people in the history of the NBA that have been inducted as both players and coaches. I believe it's Lenny Wilkens and Bill Russell, if I'm not mistaken. All right, so shout out to Lenny Wilkens. I want to do a video, and I meant to do this video like a month or so ago because Lenny Wilkens, I believe it was last month, got a statue put outside of Seattle, out in Seattle. He got a statue put out of one of the arenas out there. Once again, remember, Seattle used to have a basketball team. So shout out to Lenny Wilkens for getting the statue out there in Seattle. And I wanted to talk and briefly and do a video on Lenny Wilkens and some of the things that he accomplished in his career that a lot of people don't know. A forgotten player from the 60s into the 70s, Lenny Wilkens. And I want to thank you guys, everyone across the world, everyone across the states has been supporting my channel. Once again, guys, I am truly, truly humbled by all the support, man. It really means a lot, guys. Thank you very much to all you guys that continue to come through. Like I said, man, real recognize real, man. It means a lot, guys. Thank you so much. And you guys know what to do. Turn the volume all the way up. Hit that play button. Remember, these videos are for educational purposes. And let's roll. So, yes, guys, like I said, man, I wanted to talk about my man Lenny Wilkens out here, the great NBA player, the great coach, Hall of Fame in both regards, both aspects, Lenny Wilkens. Like I said, I believe him and Bill Russell are the only players, the only people in NBA's history to be inducted into the Hall of Fame as a player and as a coach. Now, we all know Bill Russell won 2 championships as a head coach and a player of the Boston Celtics in '68 and '69. I believe he coached the Celtics for, I want to say, 3 or 4 seasons. Bill Russell coached and played for the Boston Celtics, right? The first African-American coach in the NBA's history. These are things that Bill Russell was doing that people forget about when they mention Bill Russell and how great this man was and what he could do. The mind of Bill Russell. Like I said, the leadership of Bill Russell, galvanizing the people as a player coach. But one of the lesser known people as far as being a player coach in the history of the NBA is Lenny Wilkens, guys. Like I said in the intro, a lot of us that grew up in the 80s and the 90s, we remember Lenny Wilkens for being a head coach. Especially a lot of the Jordan fans out there, fans of the Chicago Bulls. You remember Lenny Wilkens for coaching those Cleveland Cavalier teams of the late 80s into the early 90s. That was a very formidable team. They were always a well-coached team, coached by Lenny Wilkens. They were really good on the offensive end. They were a solid defensive team. They were known as a team that didn't make a lot of mistakes. They were going to have a really good execute very well. They were very well coached. And you had players like Mark Price, the Brad Daughtys, you know, leaders, guys running your team, which would help someone like a Lenny Wilkens when you're coaching a point guard like a Mark Price, man. A forgotten point guard himself, Mark Price. So Lenny Wilkens, we remember as being a coach of those teams in the late 80s into the early 90s, right? Like I said, we're talking about the teams with Mark Price and the Brad Daugherty, the Larry Nance, the teams that Michael Jordan would be facing, right? 1988, when they beat the Cleveland Cavaliers in the first round, Michael Jordan averaging like 40 points a game. Lenny Wilkens was the coach of that team. 1989, when Michael Jordan hit that shot, that was Lenny Wilkens coaching that Cleveland Cavaliers team. When they played the Bulls in the Eastern Conference Finals in 1992, that was, in fact, Lenny Wilkens that was coaching that team. So this is how a lot of us remember or know Lenny Wilkens. But a lot of us, myself included, I didn't know this growing up at the time, that Lenny Wilkens was a Hall of Fame player, right? One of the great point guards from the 60s into the 70s, Lenny Wilkens. Now, once again, Lenny Wilkens doesn't get mentioned many times or often, you know, for that period of time, because there were some great players that played in the 60s, right? So Lenny Wilkens' name doesn't get brought up much, right? We always hear about the Will Chamberlains and the Bill Russells, the Bob Pettits, who Lenny Wilkens played with for, I believe, 4 or 5 seasons. He played with the great Bob Pettit. Oscar Robertson, Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, right? These are the great players from the 60s. Those are the names you often hear, right? But Lenny Wilkens, like I said, was a next tier guy right under those other guards. The Bob Cousy's, right? The Jerry West, the Oscar Robertsons, right? These players at the guard position, Lenny Wilkens was that next kind of tier guy, right? So when we talk about his career, multiple time All-Stars, I believe he made, I don't know, 6 or 7 All-Star appearances in his career, Lenny Wilkens. But in this video, it's not to focus on Lenny Wilkens' individual career as a player or his accolades as a player. It's to give Lenny Wilkens a lot of credit and shout him out as a guy that was a player coach. Because like I just mentioned, a lot of us remember Bill Russell, or we remember them talking about Bill Russell as a player coach. He's the most famous player coach in the NBA's history. But you guys realize that there were over 40, or I believe there were 40 player coaches at some point in time in the NBA's history, guys. At some point in time throughout basketball's history, there have been 40 player coaches. I did not even realize that. Now, a lot of these guys, probably half of them, only coached for several games. Some of these guys were player coaches for 6 games. Maybe they were player coaches for 15 games or 25 games, 30 games, right? But very few of them coached for an entire season or for multiple seasons. And as a matter of fact, I believe Lenny Wilkens is number 2 all time as far as coaching and playing, how many games you coached as a player. I believe the only player to coach and play more games simultaneously was Richie Guerin. If I'm not mistaken, shout out to Richie Guerin from New York, played for the New York Knicks for many, many years. But he is number 1 all time with the most games coached and played simultaneously. I think he had 370 or 372, something like that, games as a player coach, Richie Guerin. So shout out to him. But Lenny Wilkens is number 2 in that list, and I believe Lenny Wilkens is something like 347 or something like that. He is a player coach. Now, Lenny Wilkens came in the NBA in 1961 for the St. Louis Hawks. So he came to a team with the great Bob Pettit on it, with another great player called named Cliff Hagan. These were the 2 main stars of that team. You remember, the St. Louis Hawks won the championship in 1958. I want to say 1958. They beat the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals. Now, that is the only finals that the Celtics lost. The only finals that Bill Russell lost on his resume, 11-1 in the finals for Bill Russell, the Celtics. Remember, Bill Russell came in 57, played in the finals in 1958, and they lost in 6 games. Bill Russell missed 2 of those games. However, the St. Louis Hawks were up 2-1 with Bill Russell in those first 3 games. I believe he missed games 4 and 5. The Celtics actually won game 4 without Bill Russell. Then they would lose game 5, and then they lost game 6 with Bill Russell only playing, I believe, 20 minutes in that game. So, yes, we know Bill Russell missed 2 games, but once again, the Celtics won one of the games without Bill Russell, and in the first 3 games that he played, they were still losing 2-1. So I don't want any excuses about that for Bill Russell versus Bob Pettit. Bob Pettit went out there and earned it, led the St. Louis Hawks to their only championship. So, in 58, they won that championship. Then 3 years later, you have Lenny Wilkens coming to the NBA in 1961. Like I said, he played, I believe, 4 or 5 seasons with Bob Pettit, who retired, I believe, in 1965 from the St. Louis Hawks. And Lenny Wilkens, that first year, was not a main guy, wasn't the main guy. But then by the second year, he became the main point guard for the team. Lenny Wilkens, like I said, one of those pure point guards. Give you 8, 9 assists a game. Come out there and score maybe 15, 17 points a game for you. Lenny Wilkens. Nice ball handling ability and a solid jump shooter. Lenny Wilkens. So Lenny Wilkens made several All-Stars. Like I said, was never an All-NBA performer like that because of the great guards at the time. Like I said, the Oscar Robertsons, the Jerry Wests, right? Some of these great guards that were playing at the time, the Bob Cousy's, these guys that were out there. But Lenny Wilkens was a very good player. So it was on the Atlanta Hawks. Then he went to the he went to the Seattle Supersonics, right? The Seattle Sonics, guys, in 1969. He went to the Seattle Supersonics, right? He played on the Hawks from 61 and 68, I believe. Then in 69, he went to the Sonics. And then in 1970, Lenny Wilkens became a player head coach. He coached the Seattle Supersonics and played for the Seattle Supersonics, I believe, for 3 seasons, 1970, 71, and 72. And in 1972, he led them to a 47-win record. They were 47 and 35 that season. So a very good record for Lenny Wilkens. Like I said, player and coach for those 3 seasons on the Seattle Sonics. Then he would go to the Cleveland Cavaliers for a couple of years. And then he would go to the Portland Trail Blazers for one season. And he would be the head coach and player on the Portland Trail Blazers. In 1975, he was the Portland Trail Blazers head coach, and he played for the Portland Trail Blazers. Now, this is at the end of Lenny Wilkens' career. He was not the starting point guard for the Portland Trail Blazers. I believe that was Jeff Petrie. If I remember correctly, he was the starter when Lenny Wilkens came in. But Lenny Wilkens was the backup point guard. I believe he played like, 19, 20 minutes a game or something like that. But he was the player coach. He was the head coach when Bill Walton came to the Portland Trail Blazers. It was Lenny Wilkens. So Bill Walton comes to the Portland Trail Blazers in 1975. Lenny Wilkens is the head coach and player at the same time, guys. So once again, shout out to what Lenny Wilkens did. I believe that was one season he did that, and then he would become a full-time head coach. And like I mentioned, Lenny Wilkens would lead the Seattle Supersonics to their first and only NBA championship until this season, where we saw the Oklahoma City Thunder finally break through and win a championship. Remember, the Seattle Supersonics and Oklahoma City Thunder franchise is one of the same. So in 1979, that was, up until this year, the lone championship for the Seattle Supersonics franchise. And the head coach of that team was Lenny Wilkens. So once again, this is part of the reason why they put a statue up for Lenny Wilkens in Seattle, because of what he meant, not only to the team, leading them as the coach to that championship, but what Lenny Wilkens does for the community out there in Seattle. He's a big member of the community out there in Seattle. All right, he's got charities, and he does a lot of work in the community for the people out there. This is part of the reason why they honored Lenny Wilkens with a statue in Seattle. So much respect to Lenny Wilkens. You know what's funny about Lenny Wilkens? Like I said, he's a forgotten player. Like I said, for a lot of us, we remember him as a coach. You remember the man coached forever, right? He seemed like he was always on the sideline. Seemed like he never aged, Lenny Wilkens. The man always looked the same to me. Looked like he just never aged. He was one of those guys. Always looked good for his age. But that's how you remember him. But the funny thing is, like I said, a lot of us didn't know that Lenny Wilkens was an all-time great Hall of Fame basketball player. One of the great point guards in NBA's history, right? A true point guard, Lenny Wilkens. I remember some years back, the Olympics, right? You remember Lenny Wilkens was involved with the Olympic team, right? He was one of the coaches for the Olympic team. And I can't remember which team it was. If it was the 2016 team or the 2012 team. It might have been the 2016 team, I want to say, right? So we remember the Redeem team in 08. Then they had the team, 2012 team. I think this was the 2016 team. But I remember their reports coming out of, from the training camps, from, people trying out for the USA basketball team. And I remember them telling a story about one of the young players. And I can't remember the player's name, man. Forgive me. I wish I remembered his name. But it was one of the young players that was trying out for the Olympic team, right? And he had no clue who Lenny Wilkens was. And I remember them saying, and talking about, like, Lenny Wilkens, the player was, like, talking to Lenny Wilkens as if Lenny Wilkens never played basketball a day in his life. He had no clue that Lenny Wilkens was a Hall of Fame player. He did not know that. He just thought he was a coach. Thought he was some guy who's been around basketball a long time as a coach. Didn't even know that Lenny Wilkens was a Hall of Fame player. And there's a lot of young players out there, right? Like that player, like fans out there, young fans, young players that don't have a clue as to who these people were before they were coaches or what they did before they became coaches. Some of these guys were great players. In the case of Lenny Wilkens, he was a Hall of Fame player, right? Before he was a Hall of Fame coach. And like I said, to me, only one of two players inducted as both a player and a coach. Lenny Wilkens, Bill Russell. And like I said, I believe Lenny Wilkens is the only player in NBA's history to be a player coach for multiple teams. He was a player coach for Seattle and a player coach for Portland. He's the only player that can say that. Every other player coach in NBA's history was for one team. I believe the last player coach in NBA's history was Dave Cowens, I believe, who coached what? I believe he coached 68 games in his career for the 1979 Celtics, I want to say. He retired and continued. I believe he was playing and coaching. I believe Dave Cowens was the last player coach. But you guys want to hear some of the guys who were player coaches in their careers that you probably didn't even know. Do you guys know Dave DeBusschere, the Hall of Fame player for the New York Knicks, who was part of the 1970 and the 1973 championship New York Knicks teams? He's a player. He was a player coach, Dave DeBusschere. Bob Cousy, did you guys realize that Bob Cousy was a player coach? At the end of his career, remember, Bob Cousy came back out of retirement for the Royals, I want to say the Cincinnati Royals. He was player coach. Player coach, Bob Cousy, I believe, for 82 games. Dolph Schayes was a player coach. The great Dolph Schayes, inducted as a player. One of the great players, Dolph Schayes, of the 50s into the early 60s. Player coach. Red Holtzman, you guys remember Red Holtzman, who's a Hall of Fame coach, not a Hall of Fame player, but he was a player coach. He coached, I believe, 26 games as a player coach, Red Holtzman. You guys remember Bob Pettit, the great Bob Pettit. He was a player coach for 6 games for the St. Louis Hawks. 6 games, right? He was a player coach. And like I said, Dave Cowens. Those are just to name a few, guys, of players that were players, coaches simultaneously in the history of the NBA. So like I said, Lenny Wilkens, second most all-time games coached as a player. And like I said, Lenny Wilkens, only 1 or 2 players inducted as a player and a coach. So he was an excellent coach to go along with him being an excellent player. So shout out to Lenny Wilkens. Like I said, got a statue in Seattle. Like I said, I thought that was very interesting and great for him, man. Well-deserved, well-earned, man. One of the forgotten players from the 60s into the 70s, Lenny Wilkens, man. You guys know the deal. I'll catch you guys on the next one.